The quickest way to measure a person is often the slowest way to discover the truth. On a bright autumn afternoon in downtown Chicago, the polished glass entrance of Bellamy Couture reflected the skyline like a mirror, welcoming luxury cars, elegantly dressed shoppers, and carefully curated sophistication into one of the city's most exclusive designer boutiques. Every display window sparkled beneath soft golden lighting, showcasing handcrafted leather jackets, tailored Italian suits, and handbags worth more than many families spent on an entire vacation. Employees greeted each arriving customer with perfectly rehearsed smiles, while quiet piano music floated through the marble showroom. Then the automatic doors opened once more, and the entire atmosphere shifted without anyone saying a word. Ethan Walker stepped inside wearing faded blue jeans, worn brown work boots dusted with dried soil, a weathered plaid flannel shirt beneath an old canvas jacket, and a sun-faded tan farming cap that had clearly seen years beneath open skies. His rough hands carried the marks of honest work, while his calm blue eyes slowly admired the craftsmanship surrounding him instead of the price tags. Several shoppers glanced toward him before quickly looking away. Others were less discreet. A young couple exchanged amused smiles. A woman holding a designer handbag quietly whispered something to her friend before both laughed beneath their breath. Near the fitting rooms, two sales associates paused their conversation and watched him with visible uncertainty. Ethan noticed every glance but reacted to none of them. He simply removed his cap politely as he walked farther inside, respecting the elegance of the store even though it seemed few people intended to return that respect. Earlier that morning, Ethan had driven nearly 4 hours from his family farm outside Springfield after delivering livestock records to a regional agricultural conference. Before beginning the long drive home, he decided to stop in Chicago for one final errand. His youngest daughter would celebrate her college graduation in 2 weeks, and Ethan wanted to surprise her with something she would never purchase for herself. She had dreamed for years of beginning her professional career wearing a beautifully tailored blazer from Bellamy Couture. Ethan had quietly saved for months, placing small amounts into a separate envelope after every successful livestock auction until he finally believed he had enough. He approached a display featuring elegant women's jackets and gently examined the stitching with genuine admiration, careful not to disturb anything. The craftsmanship reminded him of the patience required to build a strong fence or restore an old barn. True quality, he believed, always revealed itself in the details. A sales associate named Lauren approached with a practiced smile that faded almost immediately after noticing Ethan's appearance. Her voice remained polite, yet noticeably restrained. "Sir, may I help you?" Ethan smiled warmly. "Yes, thank you. I am looking for a women's blazer. My daughter is graduating from college, and I was hoping you could help me find something special." Lauren briefly glanced toward his boots before answering. "Those collections begin around $3,000. Ethan nodded pleasantly. "That is perfectly all right. I would still like to see them." Lauren hesitated only for a moment before gesturing vaguely toward another corner of the showroom. "Perhaps you would be more comfortable looking at our seasonal clearance section first." Ethan quietly followed the direction of her hand before looking back toward the display he had originally chosen. He never argued. He never frowned. He simply stood there with the same calm expression that years of changing seasons had taught him to wear. Around the boutique, more curious eyes slowly drifted toward the quiet farmer standing alone beneath the crystal lights. And although no one inside Bellamy Couture realized it yet, the next few minutes would expose far more than anyone's sense of fashion. They would reveal the true cost of judging a stranger before learning the story that brought him through the front door. Lauren maintained her polite smile, yet something about it felt carefully measured rather than genuinely welcoming. She gestured once more toward the clearance section near the back of the boutique, where last season's merchandise hung beneath noticeably dimmer lighting. Ethan Walker followed her hand with his eyes before looking back toward the navy blazer displayed on the mannequin in front of him. The clean lines, precise stitching, and understated elegance reminded him of the jacket his late wife once admired in a magazine years before. His daughter, Claire, had inherited that same quiet appreciation for craftsmanship. Ethan smiled gently. "I appreciate your suggestion," he said warmly. "But I promised my daughter I would find something that would stay with her for many years. I believe quality is worth saving for." Lauren hesitated before answering. "Of course, sir. I only wanted to make sure you understood the price range. Ethan nodded without the slightest sign of offense. That is thoughtful of you. His calm response left her unexpectedly uncomfortable. She had expected embarrassment, perhaps even frustration. Instead, she found herself speaking to someone whose quiet confidence refused to be shaken by assumptions. Nearby, another sales associate named Melissa joined Lauren, pretending to reorganize several handbags while quietly observing the conversation. Is everything all right? She asked softly. Lauren lowered her voice just enough that Ethan could still hear every word. I am not entirely certain he realizes where he is shopping. Melissa glanced briefly toward Ethan's weathered boots before offering a restrained smile. Perhaps he wandered in by accident. Ethan continued examining the blazer as though the whispers belonged to the background music. Years of working open fields had taught him that strong winds eventually passed if one refused to argue with them. He gently touched the sleeve of the jacket, admiring the craftsmanship without disturbing the display. Would it be possible, he asked politely, to see this blazer in a size 6? Lauren looked surprised. You know her size? Ethan smiled with quiet pride. I remember every birthday gift I have ever bought for my daughter. It would be difficult to forget something she has dreamed about since her sophomore year of college. Before Lauren could respond, a well-dressed customer standing nearby glanced toward Ethan with open curiosity. She had overheard enough to recognize his sincerity. For a brief moment, she seemed ready to speak, but another shopper gently pulled her away, whispering that it was none of their business. Meanwhile, Melissa quietly walked toward the manager's office near the rear of the boutique. She knocked softly before entering. Inside, store manager Richard Collins reviewed inventory reports from behind a sleek walnut desk. Excuse me, Melissa said. There is a gentleman on the showroom floor creating a somewhat unusual situation. Richard looked up. What kind of situation? Melissa chose her words carefully. He appears to be out of place. The other customers have begun noticing. Richard stood and adjusted the cuff of his tailored suit jacket. Bellamy Couture prided itself on delivering an exclusive shopping experience. He believed every detail, from the music to the customer atmosphere, reflected the reputation of the brand. As he stepped onto the showroom floor, his eyes immediately found Ethan standing quietly beside the display. There was nothing disruptive about the farmer. He spoke softly. He touched nothing carelessly. He simply admired the clothing with genuine appreciation. Yet Richard noticed several affluent customers glancing repeatedly toward the unusual visitor. In his mind, perception mattered almost as much as merchandise. Ethan sensed someone approaching and turned politely. Richard greeted him with a practiced professional smile that never quite reached his eyes. Good afternoon, sir, he said evenly. I am Richard Collins, the store manager. I understand you are looking for something special today. Ethan extended his hand with the easy confidence of a man who had spent a lifetime meeting neighbors, ranchers, and business owners without ever judging them by appearance alone. Richard accepted the handshake, but as their eyes met beneath the elegant lights of the boutique, neither man realized that the next conversation would quietly set into motion events capable of changing every assumption inside Bellamy Couture before the afternoon came to an end. Richard Collins held Ethan Walker's handshake for only a brief moment before politely withdrawing his hand and studying the farmer with careful restraint. Years of managing one of Chicago's most prestigious designer boutiques had trained him to notice details quickly. He recognized expensive watches, custom tailoring, and luxury accessories almost instinctively. Looking at Ethan, however, he saw none of those familiar signals. Instead, he noticed weathered denim, faded flannel, worn leather boots, and hands marked by years beneath open skies. Richard smiled professionally. You mentioned that you were shopping for your daughter. Ethan nodded. She graduates from Northwestern University in 2 weeks. She worked very hard, and I promised myself I would give her something that reminds her every day how proud her family is. Richard glanced briefly toward the blazer Ethan had selected. That particular collection is handcrafted in Italy. The blazer alone is $4,200 before tailoring. Ethan looked once more at the jacket with genuine admiration. Quality usually asks for patience before it asks for money. Richard offered a courteous smile, although uncertainty remained behind his eyes. May I ask whether you have visited Bellamy Couture before? Ethan answered honestly. No, sir. This is my first visit. I spent several evenings reading about your company after Claire told me this was her dream store. His voice carried quiet sincerity, not the slightest hint of embarrassment. Around them, several shoppers continued browsing while discreetly watching the conversation unfold. Some pretended to examine handbags or scarves while quietly listening. Lauren stood only a few feet away, carefully arranging folded sweaters she had already organized twice. Melissa remained beside another display, exchanging occasional glances with her colleague. Richard folded his hands calmly. Bellamy Couture specializes in a personalized luxury experience. Many of our garments require private consultations before purchase. Ethan smiled. That sounds reasonable. Good craftsmanship deserves careful attention. Richard hesitated before continuing. I simply want to make certain we do not waste your valuable time if today's collection falls outside your expectations. Ethan understood the meaning beneath the carefully chosen words. He had heard similar conversations before, although rarely spoken with such polished courtesy. Still, his expression remained peaceful. Mr. Collins, he replied gently, I have spent 30 years raising cattle, repairing fences, planting fields, and watching seasons change. I learned long ago that assumptions grow much faster than crops. Richard blinked slightly, surprised by the thoughtful answer. Ethan continued with the same calm voice. You do not know me, and I do not know you. That seems like a good reason for both of us to remain curious instead of certain. For the first time since approaching the farmer, Richard found himself without an immediate response. Before he could speak again, Ethan carefully reached inside his worn canvas jacket. Several nearby shoppers quietly leaned forward, curious about what he might produce. Instead of a wallet filled with cash or anything dramatic, Ethan simply removed a neatly folded photograph. The edges showed signs of years spent inside the same pocket. He gently handed it to Richard. It showed a young woman wearing graduation robes during a campus ceremony rehearsal, smiling brightly beneath spring sunshine while standing beside an older man in work clothes. That is Claire, Ethan said softly. She has always believed that people should build things that last. I suppose she learned that from growing up on a farm. Richard studied the photograph longer than expected. The warmth between father and daughter was unmistakable. Around the showroom, the quiet laughter that had greeted Ethan's arrival had almost completely disappeared, replaced by an uncomfortable silence as more customers began seeing something very different from the man who had first walked through Bellamy Couture's front door. Even so, Richard remained uncertain about what to do next, and the decision he was about to make would soon place the entire boutique on a path none of them could have imagined. Richard Collins slowly folded the photograph and handed it back with careful respect. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The silence felt heavier than any argument could have been. Ethan Walker slipped the picture safely inside his jacket pocket and rested one weathered hand against the display counter. His calm expression never changed. He had not come to defend himself. He had come to buy a gift for the daughter who had spent 4 years proving that determination could open doors no amount of money ever could. Richard cleared his throat. Mr. Walker, I certainly admire your dedication to your family. Ethan nodded politely. Thank you. Richard glanced around the boutique. More customers had quietly stopped shopping altogether. They pretended to browse elegant handbags and tailored coats while listening from a respectful distance. The atmosphere no longer felt relaxed. Every employee sensed that something important was unfolding, although no one fully understood why. Richard lowered his voice. Please understand that Bellamy Couture is known for providing a very exclusive experience. Some guests may feel uncomfortable if they believe. He paused, searching for gentler words. Ethan completed the sentence with a faint smile. If they believe I do not belong here. Richard hesitated before giving a slow nod. Ethan's answer carried no bitterness. It sounded more like simple observation than accusation. I am sorry if that impression has been created, Richard replied. Ethan looked around the showroom, admiring the polished marble floors, the carefully arranged displays, and the warm lighting that made every garment appear almost timeless. It is a beautiful store, he said quietly. Places like this remind me of old barns built by skilled craftsmen. Every beam has purpose. Every detail matters. It would be a shame if people forgot that the same should be true for those who walk through the front door. Richard felt an unfamiliar discomfort settle across his shoulders. Before he could answer, Lauren approached carefully. Sir, she whispered to the manager. Some customers have asked whether everything is all right. Richard nodded without taking his eyes from Ethan. Everything is under control. Then he made a decision he believed would protect the reputation of the boutique. His tone remained courteous, but noticeably firmer. Mr. Walker, perhaps today is not the best day for your visit. I would be happy to arrange an appointment at another time. Ethan blinked once, surprised more by the suggestion than by the words themselves. May I ask why? Richard answered carefully. I believe it would be in everyone's best interest. Ethan looked directly into the manager's eyes. Including mine? Richard did not respond immediately. His silence answered the question more clearly than words ever could. Ethan gently picked up his old farming cap from the display table and brushed away a small trace of dried field dust with the sleeve of his jacket. If you truly believe leaving would make everyone more comfortable, he said softly, I will respect your request. Lauren released a quiet breath of relief. Melissa looked toward the entrance. Richard gave a subtle signal to the uniformed security officer standing near the front doors. The officer, Michael Harris, walked across the marble floor with calm professionalism, unaware of everything that had already been said. Ethan noticed him approaching and offered a friendly smile before the officer even reached him. Michael returned the greeting with equal courtesy, sensing no threat whatsoever. He simply believed he had been asked to assist with an unusual customer interaction. Around the boutique, conversations stopped completely. Every eye followed the quiet farmer and the approaching security officer. Outside, afternoon sunlight reflected across the towering glass windows of Bellamy Couture while traffic flowed normally through downtown Chicago. Inside, however, time itself seemed to slow. None of them realized that within the next few moments a single telephone call would completely transform the meaning of everything that had happened since Ethan first stepped through the front entrance. Security Officer Michael Harris stopped a respectful distance from Ethan Walker and offered a courteous nod that felt noticeably warmer than the atmosphere surrounding them. Unlike the uneasy glances from several employees, Michael saw only a calm middle-aged man standing quietly beside a display of tailored jackets. Good afternoon, sir, he said gently. My name is Michael. The manager has asked me to assist. Is everything all right? Ethan smiled with the same steady kindness he had carried since entering the boutique. Everything is perfectly all right. I was just preparing to leave. Michael studied Ethan's face for a brief moment. Years of working security had taught him to recognize agitation long before it appeared. He found none. There was no anger, no raised voice, no resentment. Only quiet disappointment wrapped in remarkable dignity. Richard Collins stepped forward. Thank you, Michael. We simply want to make certain today's shopping experience remains comfortable for everyone. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly before placing his weathered farming cap back on his head. I understand, he answered softly. Every business has the right to make its own decisions. Around the showroom, several customers shifted uncomfortably. The woman who had earlier overheard Ethan speaking about his daughter slowly lowered the designer handbag she had been examining. She glanced toward Richard as though waiting for him to reconsider, but the manager remained composed. Lauren quietly folded her hands together. Melissa avoided looking directly at Ethan altogether. The silence grew heavier with every passing second. Michael politely gestured toward the entrance. Whenever you are ready, sir. Ethan nodded appreciatively. Thank you for treating me with respect. Those simple words lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. Michael offered a faint smile. Respect should never depend on where someone shops. Richard heard the sentence, but chose not to respond. He believed the situation was almost over. Ethan took one slow step across the polished marble floor. Then another. His worn leather boots echoed softly beneath the crystal lighting as he approached the front entrance. Just before reaching the doors, a sharp electronic ringtone interrupted the silence. Every head turned instinctively. The sound came from Michael's company radio clipped beside his belt, immediately followed by the vibration of his work phone. Michael apologized politely before answering. Security, this is Michael Harris speaking. His professional expression remained unchanged for only a moment. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, sir. I understand. You are certain. Richard frowned, noticing the sudden shift in Michael's posture. Of course, sir. Michael continued respectfully. I will inform them immediately. He listened for several more seconds without speaking, then quietly answered. Yes, sir. He is still here. The call ended. For a brief moment, Michael simply stared at the screen in his hand, as though making certain he had read the caller identification correctly. Richard stepped closer. Is there a problem? Michael looked from the manager to Ethan before taking a slow breath. The call came directly from the executive office. Richard blinked. The executive office? Michael nodded. The chairman's personal assistant instructed me that Mr. Ethan Walker is not to leave the building under any circumstances. Complete silence settled across Bellamy Couture. Even the soft piano music seemed to disappear beneath the weight of those unexpected words. Ethan looked genuinely puzzled rather than triumphant. There must be some mistake, he said quietly. Michael shook his head. Sir, the assistant repeated your name twice. Richard's confident expression slowly faded as questions began racing through his mind. Several employees exchanged bewildered glances while curious customers stopped pretending to browse altogether. No one understood why the executive office of Bellamy Couture would suddenly intervene on behalf of a farmer who had walked into the boutique wearing dusty boots and an old canvas jacket. Yet somewhere high above the city, another conversation had already begun, and within minutes every assumption inside the showroom would begin to unravel one careful truth at a time. No one inside Bellamy Couture moved. The silence after Michael Harris lowered his phone felt almost unreal, as though the elegant boutique itself had stopped breathing. Richard Collins stared at the security officer, searching for some sign that the unexpected call had been misunderstood. The chairman's office? He repeated quietly. Michael nodded with complete certainty. Yes, sir. The instructions were very clear. Mr. Ethan Walker is asked to remain here until another representative arrives. Ethan looked equally surprised. He rested both hands lightly on the brim of his farming cap before offering an apologetic smile. I believe there has been some confusion. I do not personally know anyone at your corporate office. Michael answered respectfully. That may be true, sir, but they certainly know your name. The words settled heavily across the showroom. Lauren slowly lowered the folded sweater she had been pretending to organize. Melissa glanced toward Richard, hoping the manager would explain what was happening, but he remained completely silent. Several customers quietly exchanged uncertain looks. Only minutes earlier, many had assumed the farmer had wandered into the wrong store. Now every assumption seemed far less certain. Richard finally spoke. Michael, who exactly placed the call? The personal assistant to Chairman Charles Bellamy, Michael answered. Even Richard felt his heartbeat quicken. Charles Bellamy almost never contacted individual boutiques directly. He oversaw an international luxury fashion company with offices around the world. Routine matters were handled by regional executives, never by the chairman's personal office. Whatever had prompted this call was clearly extraordinary. Before anyone could continue the conversation, Michael's phone vibrated once again. He immediately answered. Yes, this is Michael Harris. He listened carefully before replying. Understood, sir. I will place the call on speaker. Michael looked toward Ethan with polite respect. Mr. Walker, the chairman's office would like to speak with you directly. Ethan appeared genuinely uncomfortable with the sudden attention. With me? Michael nodded. Yes, sir. He carefully activated the speaker function. A calm professional voice filled the quiet boutique. Good afternoon. This is Margaret Ellis from Chairman Bellamy's executive office. Am I speaking with Mr. Ethan Walker? Ethan stepped forward modestly. Yes, ma'am. This is Ethan. Mr. Walker, thank you for remaining at the boutique. Chairman Bellamy asked me to personally apologize for the inconvenience you have experienced today. He is currently traveling between meetings, but he specifically requested that you remain our guest until he can speak with you. Richard's expression changed completely. Lauren instinctively covered her mouth with one hand. Melissa looked toward Ethan with open disbelief. Even the customers standing nearby stopped pretending to browse. Ethan answered with sincere confusion. That is very kind, but I believe there has been some misunderstanding. I have never had the privilege of meeting Mr. Bellamy. Margaret paused briefly before replying with quiet confidence. Perhaps not personally, Mr. Walker. However, Chairman Bellamy knows your family very well. He has asked me to remind you of the Walker Heritage Ranch in central Illinois. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. For the first time since entering the boutique, genuine surprise appeared across his face. Memories from many years earlier quietly returned. Margaret continued. The chairman said you would understand after hearing one more name. Thomas Bellamy. Ethan lowered his eyes for several seconds before looking back toward the phone with quiet recognition. Thomas, he whispered softly. I have not heard that name in almost 30 years. Every person inside the showroom watched the farmer with complete attention. Whatever story connected the Walker family to the founder of one of America's most respected luxury fashion houses clearly reached far beyond anything they had imagined. Outside, late afternoon sunlight continued shining across downtown Chicago exactly as before, but inside Bellamy Couture, every opinion formed during the past hour had already begun dissolving beneath the weight of a history that none of them had ever expected to discover. The name lingered in the quiet boutique like an echo from another lifetime. Ethan Walker stood motionless, his thoughtful blue eyes fixed on the phone resting in Michael Harris's hand. Around him, every employee and customer waited without speaking, sensing that the story unfolding before them had only begun. Ethan smiled faintly, almost to himself. Thomas Bellamy, he repeated softly. He was one of the finest young men I ever met. Margaret Ellis answered gently through the speaker. Chairman Charles Bellamy hoped you would remember him. Ethan nodded slowly. His father owned only a small leather workshop back then. Thomas spent one summer working near our ranch while studying agricultural supply chains. He wanted to understand where the finest leather actually began. Richard Collins listened carefully, unable to hide his growing astonishment. Ethan continued with quiet humility. Most people assumed he would never last a week on a cattle ranch. He had never repaired a fence, fed livestock before sunrise, or spent 12 hours beneath the summer sun. But he never complained. Every evening he asked questions because he wanted to learn. Margaret smiled, her warmth evident even through the phone. Chairman Bellamy often says that summer changed his entire career. Ethan looked genuinely surprised. I only showed him what my father taught me. Good leather begins with healthy cattle, patient stewardship, and respect for the land. Margaret answered. Chairman Bellamy says it was much more than that. He says your family taught him that luxury begins long before a designer sketches a jacket. It begins with the people whose names customers never see. Complete silence filled Bellamy Couture. Lauren slowly lowered her eyes. Melissa quietly stepped backward, unable to meet Ethan's gaze. Richard suddenly remembered an article displayed years earlier inside the company's executive newsletter describing the Bellamy Heritage Collection, a premium leather line built upon partnerships with a handful of family ranches known for exceptional quality and ethical practices. Until this moment, he had never considered that one of those families might be standing inside his own boutique. Margaret continued speaking. Chairman Bellamy also asked me to remind you that Walker Heritage Ranch remains one of our longest continuous partners. Every signature leather collection produced by Bellamy Couture still begins with materials raised by your family. Ethan smiled modestly. My son manages most of the ranch now. He has improved everything beyond what I could have imagined. Margaret laughed softly. Chairman Bellamy said you would probably give someone else the credit. Richard felt the weight of every decision he had made during the past hour. The worn boots he had quietly judged had walked across thousands of acres that helped produce the leather carried inside nearly every premium display surrounding him. The weathered hands he had mistaken for evidence of poverty had spent decades preserving standards his own company proudly advertised around the world. Yet Ethan himself had never mentioned any of it. He had entered Bellamy Couture for only one reason. He wanted to buy a graduation gift for his daughter. Michael finally broke the silence. Sir, he said respectfully to Ethan, I believe everyone here owes you more kindness than we first offered. Ethan looked toward the security officer with genuine warmth. You have already shown me kindness. Michael lowered his head appreciatively. Margaret spoke once more. Mr. Walker, Chairman Bellamy is driving here personally. He asked that no one assist you until he arrives because he wishes to welcome you himself. Ethan shook his head almost apologetically. There truly is no need for that. Margaret answered with quiet conviction. According to Chairman Bellamy, there has been a need for that ever since you first walked through the front door. As the call ended, no one inside the boutique saw an ordinary farmer any longer. They saw a quiet man who had never used his influence to demand respect, because he had spent his entire life earning it without ever needing to announce who he was. A quiet sense of humility settled over Bellamy Couture, as though the elegant boutique itself had become aware of its own reflection. No one spoke for several long seconds after Margaret Ellis ended the call. The polished marble floors, crystal lighting, and carefully arranged displays remained exactly as they had been an hour earlier, yet every person inside seemed to see them through different eyes. Richard Collins slowly walked toward Ethan Walker. The confidence that had once guided every decision now gave way to sincere reflection. He stopped only a few feet away. "Mr. Walker," he began carefully, "I owe you an apology." Ethan looked at him with the same calm expression he had carried since entering the boutique. Richard continued, "I believed I was protecting the reputation of this store. Instead, I failed to protect the values that should define it." Ethan smiled gently, making no effort to prolong the manager's discomfort. Every person makes decisions with the understanding they have at the moment. Richard lowered his eyes. "That is true, but I judged your appearance before I ever listened to your story." Ethan quietly looked around the showroom before answering. Most people do not intend to hurt anyone. Sometimes they simply move too quickly to become curious. Lauren stepped forward next, her eyes filled with quiet regret. "I should have shown you the blazer the moment you asked." Ethan offered her an encouraging smile. "You still can." Lauren looked surprised. "You still wish to buy it?" Ethan laughed softly. "My daughter is still graduating in 2 weeks." The gentle humor eased the tension throughout the boutique. Even Melissa found herself smiling through obvious embarrassment. Richard turned toward Lauren. "Please bring every size we have available. Arrange a private fitting room exactly as we would for any distinguished guest." Ethan shook his head politely. "Please do not treat me differently because of a telephone call." Richard answered with complete sincerity. "We should have treated you this way before the telephone ever rang." Those words remained suspended in the quiet air. Several customers nodded almost instinctively. The woman who had earlier watched everything unfold approached Ethan with respectful warmth. "Sir," she said softly, "I hope your daughter treasures that gift forever." Ethan smiled. "I believe she will treasure the love behind it even more." At that moment, the boutique doors opened once again. A distinguished older gentleman entered accompanied only by one assistant rather than a large entourage. His charcoal overcoat, silver hair, and relaxed confidence attracted immediate attention without demanding it. Every employee recognized him instantly. Chairman Charles Bellamy had arrived. Richard immediately stepped forward, visibly nervous, but Charles gently raised one hand before the manager could speak. His eyes remained fixed on Ethan. A warm smile slowly appeared across his face. He crossed the marble floor with calm, unhurried steps before extending both hands toward the farmer. "Mr. Walker," he said with unmistakable affection, "it has been far too many years." Ethan smiled broadly as recognition replaced surprise. "You look very much like your father." Charles laughed warmly. "People have been telling me that my entire life, and today it feels like the greatest compliment anyone could give me." Without hesitation, he shook Ethan's hand with genuine gratitude instead of formal ceremony. Every employee watched in complete silence as one of the most respected leaders in American luxury fashion greeted the quiet farmer not as an important supplier, not as a wealthy business partner, but as an old family friend whose influence had quietly shaped the very principles upon which Bellamy Couture had been built. In that simple handshake, every expensive display surrounding them suddenly seemed less valuable than the characters standing in the center of the room, because true elegance had never belonged to clothing alone. Charles Bellamy remained beside Ethan Walker for several quiet moments, smiling with the kind of gratitude that only years of shared history could create. Around them, every employee stood respectfully still, not because company protocol demanded it, but because they sensed they were witnessing something far more valuable than an ordinary business meeting. Charles gently placed one hand on Ethan's shoulder. "My father often said that the finest lesson he ever received about luxury came from a cattle ranch, not a fashion house." Ethan laughed softly. "Thomas always exaggerated." Charles smiled. "No, he simply remembered what mattered." Turning toward Richard Collins, Charles spoke with calm professionalism rather than anger. "Richard, I know you care deeply about protecting our brand. That is one of the reasons you have led this boutique successfully. But our reputation has never depended upon marble floors or designer labels. It depends upon whether every person who enters our doors leaves feeling respected." Richard lowered his head sincerely. "I understand that now, sir." Charles nodded gently. "Understanding is valuable only when it changes tomorrow." Richard accepted the words without hesitation. "It will." Charles then looked toward Lauren, Melissa, Michael Harris, and the remaining staff. Today has given all of us an opportunity to remember something my father wrote into the first employee handbook more than 40 years ago. He smiled warmly before repeating the sentence from memory. Never measure a customer by what they wear, because true value rarely announces itself before introducing its character. The boutique remained completely silent. Several employees quietly reflected upon those words while customers exchanged thoughtful smiles. Ethan finally spoke. "If I may ask one favor." Charles immediately answered, "Anything." Ethan glanced toward the navy blazer that had first caught his attention. "I would still like to purchase that jacket exactly as any father would. No special discounts. No gifts. I have been saving for it for quite some time." Charles laughed with genuine admiration. "That answer sounds exactly like the Ethan Walker my father described." Lauren carefully brought the blazer in Claire's size and escorted Ethan to a private fitting room with the same warmth she wished she had shown from the beginning. When Ethan returned carrying the elegant garment inside its signature Bellamy garment bag, she handed him the receipt with both hands in sincere gratitude. "Congratulations to your daughter," she said softly. Ethan smiled. "Thank you. I believe she will wear this with great pride." Before leaving, Richard walked with Ethan toward the front entrance. Sunlight streamed through the glass doors as afternoon slowly faded into evening across downtown Chicago. Richard extended his hand. This time the gesture carried no hesitation. "Thank you for teaching us something we should have already known." Ethan shook his hand warmly. Sometimes the best harvest comes after an unexpected season. Several months later, Bellamy Couture introduced a new employee training program across every boutique in the country. It focused less on luxury products and more on listening, curiosity, dignity, and respect. New associates learned that extraordinary service begins with how someone is welcomed, not with what they choose to purchase. Framed near the entrance of every Bellamy boutique appeared a simple sentence inspired by that unforgettable afternoon. It read, "Every guest deserves to be seen before they are judged." On a bright spring morning, Ethan returned to the family ranch where cattle grazed peacefully beneath wide blue skies. Claire proudly wore her graduation blazer during her first day at a respected architectural firm, carrying with her not only a beautiful gift, but also the quiet example her father had lived every day of his life. Ethan never spoke publicly about what had happened inside Bellamy Couture. He did not need recognition because the greatest victories rarely require applause. They simply leave the world a little kinder than they found it. And in the end, the most valuable thing ever displayed inside that designer store was never hanging beneath the lights. It quietly walked through the front door wearing dusty boots and carrying a heart that no label could ever improve.